Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up, and make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and in this video I want to talk about Nexus Beings because the most recent episode of Wandavision has basically established that Wanda is a Nexus Being. Now, we're largely going to keep this confined to comics. We're not really going to be doing a whole lot of discussion on the Wandavision show itself. What I will say is that the idea of Agatha referring to Wanda as a Scarlet Witch is really looks like the MCU is transforming the name or the title of Scarlet Witch into exactly that, a title that belongs to a person who is a Nexus Being, as opposed to it simply just being a moniker that Scarlet Witch adopted for herself and just kind of calling it a day. But focusing on the comics, right? Focusing strictly on the comic books here, the idea of a Nexus Being hails from what we refer to as the Nexus of all realities. Now, to give you guys some perspective here, when it comes to the multiverse in Marvel Comics, this is a really complex thing, not in terms of its ability to understand, but in terms of how it functions. So what you guys are aware of is the fact that you've got a multiverse, right? Multiple universes all operating essentially simultaneously. And the entirety of the multiverse in Marvel Comics is largely born by what we call divergent timelines, which is to say, what if things had happened differently? So there's an alternate reality, for example, where Stephen Strange never became the Sorcerer Supreme, where it was somebody else, right? Some guy named John who's watching this video right now. Congratulations, John, you're the Sorcerer Supreme. And this even applies to major events, right? Take, for example, the idea of Peter Parker becoming Venom. What if Peter Parker never stopped being Venom? Or, Peter Parker in his black symbiote suit. Spider-Man fans like to split hairs and say, actually, he's not technically Venom, but he was possessed by the Venom symbiote. He was basically Venom. If we look at that and we say, what if Peter Parker never lost the symbiote? There's a timeline for that. What this all basically means is that Nexus Beings are supremely powerful, because if you look at the idea of the multiverse, this comes in a couple different forms. You have things like the Omniversal Development Court and the Omniversal Matrix, who oversees the Omniversal Development Court, and their job is to basically make sure that across all the timelines that like mutants come into existence around the same time, that like every universe has a version of the Avengers, that people with superpowers in general start to emerge, just different things like that. And the Omniversal Magistrix oversees all of that and makes sure that everything's going the way it's supposed to. That's what happened in the old Mad Jim Jasper storyline, where you ended up having Saturnine, who realized that there was a universe where nobody had powers, and when they tried to make that happen, it was revealed that Jim Jaspers had basically killed everybody with powers and then used his reality warping abilities to totally distort and destroy that universe. But nonetheless, you have things like what's called the Nexus of all realities, which comes from the Florida Everglades, believe it or not. That's actually where you ended up having Howard the Duck introduced into Marvel Comics, where you basically go to the Florida Everglades and there's a being there called the Man-Thing, and that he'll essentially test you, right? He'll actually touch you, and if you feel fear, you'll burn at the touch of the Man-Thing. But if you're fearless, you'll be able to basically pass him and then go through the Florida Everglades into the Nexus of all realities, and then you can access any universe from there. But there's multiple ways to enter in and out of the universe. That's leaving out things like the M'Kron crystal and stuff like that. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. What makes Nexus Beings so significant here is that in every universe, you have guys like Doctor Strange, or you have the Ancient One, or you have Brother Voodoo. You have people out there who can use magical energy. But unlike those guys, all the mystic energy that exists in one universe, including all the pocket dimensions like Asgard, like the Dark Dimension from Dormammu and places like that, they all kind of flow through that person. And so what it means is that if you have somebody like Doctor Strange, for example, to kind of give you guys a comparison here between someone like the Scarlet Witch, who's a Nexus Being, and someone like Doctor Strange, that Doctor Strange uses the powers of other people, right? So Doctor Strange borrows powers from like the Vishanti, which is where he gets like 80% of his powers from. He borrows powers from Sidorak, the guy who turned the Juggernaut into the Juggernaut, and he uses those to spawn Crimson Bands, and a litany of other beings out there. But not every source of magic that's available to be used can be used by Stephen Strange. And so if Stephen Strange were a guy who were walking through a hallway of doors, and behind each one of these doors is a source of magic he can tap into, some of those doors are just locked, and he doesn't have a key for it. A person who's a Nexus Being has a master key. They can open every single door. They can access every single source of energy that exists out there, right? Dimensions that are composed of pure energy that they can manipulate, they can control, they can use it for their own ends. This also comes by way of the fact that their ability to alter timelines is something that comes from their ability to manipulate or to affect the probability of a universe unfolding in timelines that can diverge from that particular action, right? So if you look at the early powers of the Scarlet Witch, she had what was called probability manipulation, which is to say say in one of the early stories, for example, they were fighting Ultron and using her powers, like Ultron, like a portion of him short-circuited. And it was like, okay, so that's how the Avengers were able to find their opening and they defeated Ultron. It was by virtue of her powers that happened. Had she not been there, that never would have taken place. Ultron probably would have killed the heroes, and then you would have had Age of Ultron published 30 years before it was actually written by Bendis and them, right? So the whole point behind this is that because the multiverse exists as a result of realities diverging off, and because those realities diverge off based on changes to the timeline, a person who's a Nexus being can quite literally create alternate timelines. And that's why groups like the Time Variance Authority keep such a close eye on those individuals who are Nexus beings, because the Time Variance Authority is to make sure people don't screw with the timeline and mess things up. And so if Scarlet Witch came into the full understanding of what she was capable of and was able to manipulate 100% of all the various mystical energies that were out there, then a few things would happen. One, she would become equal to eternity in power. Those of you guys who don't know what that means, eternity is a being who is able to, who's the living embodiment of the universe. Now, he's not the top dog. If you have an infinity gauntlet, you can overpower eternity. And I would dare say that if she reached the full totality of being a Nexus being and was able to 100% control all the mystical energies that exist in her universe, she'd probably become equivalent to an infinity gauntlet, right? The ability to manipulate time, space, the mind, reality itself, all that kind of stuff. The other thing that would happen is she could arbitrarily create alternate realities, right? She could just create them on a whim. She could say, okay, so like this is a series of events that have happened. Let's change that. Let's do something else instead. And literally reality, the universe would just become a bauble in her hand. She could just change it and alter it and do whatever she wants with it. But there are huge checks and balances in place to make sure she can't do that. We've already talked about the Time Variance Authority, and the Time Variance Authority would basically neutralize her, right? Like in that case, if she was doing that, they would basically, they have the ability to neutralize people who are Nexus beings, and they would do that. They would find her, they would take her down, and then in turn, they would like fix the timeline, quote unquote, and that would basically be it. But then there are other things as well, like the Living Tribunal. The Living Tribunal exists to make sure that mystical balance is maintained throughout any one particular universe and across the entirety of the multiverse. So that's why you couldn't have Doctor Strange leave his universe and then go to an alternate reality and say, I'm going to be Doctor Strange here, and we'll have two Sorcerer Supremes in the universe. That violates the laws, the mystic laws of the universe. And so the Living Tribunal would step in and then say, okay, Stephen Strange, either you go back to your native universe, or I will wipe you from existence and then replace you with a new Sorcerer Supreme in your universe, and then go forward accordingly. If the Scarlet Witch as a Nexus being were to arbitrarily start going through and creating divergent timelines and just throwing off all the mystical balance in her universe, then the Living Tribunal would step in, assuming the Time Variance Authority did not, and call it a day, right? Basically neutralize her powers or force her to obey and to set things back to the way they were before, because she'd have no power over the Living Tribunal. That's not going to happen. I don't care how powerful any Nexus being is out there, none of them will ever come close to the power of the Living Tribunal. It just doesn't work that way. Literally the Tribunal's job is to safeguard the multiverse, right? So, barring some beings out there like the Beyonders, very few people, if any, are going to be able to come close to the Tribunal's power. But the biggest issue that you have when it comes to the idea of Nexus beings is that Marvel's never fully fleshed out the idea. And that's the biggest struggle, right? The idea of a Nexus being has existed in Marvel Comics for decades, but they've never done anything with it, right? They've never really explained it in any super concrete, in-depth way that applies to Scarlet Witch as she exists now, right? So the idea of Scarlet Witch being a Nexus being has never been adequately explained in relation to like the events of the House of M or anything like that. Marvel hasn't done that. They probably will now in Marvel Comics because of what's going on with the MCU, but it's never really happened before. The only thing that we as comic book fans know is that it's a thing that exists out there, that a person who is a Nexus being has the potential to become the most powerful being throughout the entirety of the multiverse, possibly even achieving power greater than that of eternity, and potentially becoming equal to a infinity gauntlet in scope. They can communicate with other beings out there who are Nexus beings, that those individuals who are Nexus beings across the whole multiverse, no two are alike, meaning no two have the exact same power, that some can control their magic in some ways, some can control it in other ways, so like necromancy, different things along those lines, but that they're not identical across the board. So it's not like a Jonathan Hickman, Molecule Man, Owen Reese kind of situation for those of you guys who understand the reference. That's not what we're talking about. Molecule Man Owen Reese is stupid powerful, right? He's a multiversal force of power. I mean, the guy could just wipe out universes with a wave of his hand, but like, that's not what we're talking about. It's not that exact same kind of concept. It's one of these things that Marvel's just never fully fleshed out. Hopefully they will, but that's what makes a video like this explaining Nexus being so difficult, is because it's like trying to catch smoke in your hands to a degree, right? It's an intangible concept that's never really been solidified in Marvel. It's more of a title that belongs to Wanda Maximoff that doesn't really seem to have any direct correlation with anything she's recently done of significance. And like, That's it. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.